I'm John Dean, by the way. I've been making games my entire career, and I won't bore you with all the backgrounds, but I'm one of the co-founders along with of UDEN, along with Jeff, and also with Clark Stacey at Wildworks. We founded UDEN a few years ago, and here we are today. So with that said, we're going to get started with our panel. I'd like to, I know you're here to see them. So the conversation we thought we'd start is, we know what you learned last summer in AR and VR, which is really just clickbait type headline, really. We're going to have a good conversation about what these guys have learned in VR and AR, and give us some glimpses to what's happening in the future. So without further ado, let me introduce the absolutely wonderful Mr. Deep Rifter himself. This is Chris Madsen. Chris, take it away.
All right.
You guys want to come share a microphone?
All right, a quick introduction for myself. I have a background, almost 20 years in behavioral science. And you know, we've all had promises made about what VR and AR are going to bring to our lives. We've heard these promises for decades, and it's never quite taken off quite like it has now. And one of the first questions I'm going to have to my panelists after I introduce them is, what was the promise of VR for you? Everybody has this, how did I get into VR story? Very briefly, I'll just explain what my get into VR story was, and then I'll introduce these guys and have them give a quick story about how they got into VR and what the promise of VR means for them. So, my first introduction to VR was with the DK1, the developer kit #1 from Oculus Rift. And I remember first putting that on my head. I did a program called Greebles, which is an excellent program for showing what we call true scale in VR, where you can actually see the scale of something. It's not a representation of a whale or something large on a screen. When you're viewing it in VR, things are actually as large as they are in real life. And I remember doing this program, Greebles, and just going, oh my gosh, this is better than any planetarium experience I've ever had in my entire life. And it was so powerful for me that I looked at my wife afterwards. I said, I think I may have just changed careers. And that was really the seed for me. The final clincher for me was when I had my first social VR experience, when I was able to meet an avatar of another person face to face and realize there's an intelligence within that avatar. And I can feel that spatial awareness. If he got too close, I would back up a couple of steps because that presence of being there with another person was so real. And I realized at that time, think of what this can do in the educational field. All of a sudden, distance doesn't matter anymore. I can be present in an experience with anybody, regardless of where they are in the world. And, as a lucky bonus, the laws of physics do not apply in a virtual world, so we can literally have any experience that we want to create in that virtual world. What does that mean for the medical field? What does that mean for education? What does that mean for grandma to join up with her granddaughter on her birthday and actually be present when she blows out the candles on that cake, despite the fact that she might be halfway around the world? That's what really sold me to the magic of VR, is the potential for multi-user experiences for that social VR. I've got two awesome panelists here, good friends of mine. Let's start with Joe Gabriel, who started his VR career with The Void. Some amazing stories there, and I do want to circle back around to out-of-home virtual reality, so I'll have some specific questions down the road about that. You also worked with Cosmic Pictures, just created a virtual experience that just went live in the Steam store, which is awesome. And you're also involved with Virtuality's VR arcades. So awesome background there. You're doing all kinds of stuff in VR. And you can update us too. I know you're doing some new stuff as well, Joe. And we've got Ben Hessen, who is currently working at Morph 3D, building avatars for people, or actually creating the tools for people to easily build avatars and build who they want to be. Because as we're having these social VR experiences, we have to be represented by an avatar. So Morph 3D is creating that opportunity for us all to create the identities that we want in the metaverse or in VR. And also just started your own company as well, RDisc, and I'll give you a chance to chat about that as well. Joe, let's start with you. What was your What was the selling point of VR for you? What got you involved in this industry? What was the promises?
So this is fun. So there was a time where Ben and I worked at the same company, same position, and it was a literacy company based out of Provo called Imagine Learning. And we were like, I don't even, what was the position? It was sales coordinator, where we like assisted the salespeople out in the field that were selling software, and we would do data entry for them. And it was like this super, it was a good entry level job, I'll just say that, out of college. But we were hungry for growth and success. So one day, one of our coworkers, we heard about the DK1, well, the Oculus success on Kickstarter. They had raised like $2 million, and it was one of the largest, I think at the time was the largest like hardware Kickstarter campaigns that had existed. And he was one of the original backers, so he got a headset, and he just made an open invite for anyone to come by his desk to come check it out. And so we went by to check it out, and this is, I don't know, this may or may not be Ben's experience, but it was at the same time. So Ben and I went to this guy's desk, and Ben went first. And he put the headset on, and I'm standing behind him, and I could see the monitor, and the monitor is like split in half, so you can see through each eye kind of what he's looking at, and that was kind of weird. And then Ben's sitting down in his chair, and it was a roller coaster demo that launched with the headset. And I'm watching Ben put this like thing on his head, and all of a sudden in the demo, I see Ben, his body moving like this. And I was just like, what is he doing? You know, he looks like a little kid that's playing Mario Kart that's like moving with the, not just little kids, right? So it just like, first of all, I was like, that looks really odd, you know, really straight. So I was like, my curiosity was super piqued. But then I got to go through it afterwards, and Ben was just, I mean, your face was priceless at the time, just like speechless, right? And then I got to put it on, and you're in this roller coaster, and it's kind of like this old medieval castle that the roller coaster is going around, and it's just placed in this little landscape. But I mean, you go in there, my first time, VR virgin, right? And you're looking forward, and then you look to your left, and you're waiting for that edge of your screen to approach, and all of a sudden you go all the way around, and you realize there was no edge of that screen, and that you're in this world. And that was like that moment where my brain clicked into just like, I just had a magical experience that I wasn't prepared for, you know? And so all these wheels start turning, and that was my entry point. That was the gateway drug right there for VR.
Wonderful. Yeah, so that was a great experience. I think my first introduction to VR was actually in the 90s. Everyone remembers back when Nintendo was working on their stuff, and they came out with their first headset that didn't do very well, the Virtual Boy. I was fortunate enough to have one. It had, you put it, you didn't put it on, you put it on a table, and you would, you know, get up close to the table, and you'd stick your head in, and it had like a warning, you could only use it for like 15 minutes or it would burn your eyes or something crazy like that. And obviously, being an 8-year-old or 9-year-old child, I would use it for much longer than that, and I think to this day I have eye problems because of it, but it's okay. But I remember seeing that then, and then seeing and being just amazed at, I played the Mario Tennis game over and over and over again in that Virtual Boy, and I absolutely loved it. And then doing the experience that Joe talked about, it was finally this moment of like, oh my gosh, like we're here, and this is something that's going to become kind of more mainstream. This isn't what it was, and we're finally at a technological standpoint where we can create these amazing experiences. And it was kind of that moment that, for me as well, it was kind of like, all right, this is what I'm gonna do. And so I've been doing VR, AR development ever since.
Cool. Now, it's interesting. You know, it used to be a very clear distinction. When we talked about VR, we knew exactly what we were talking about. And then this AR started coming into vogue a couple of years ago. We started talking more about that. And now all of a sudden we're in this debate about AR, VR, let's just call everything XR. What is that all about? You know, this XR thing, what does that even mean? Why? Where are we at with this? What does that represent to you guys?
So first of all, like coming with some marketing background, I definitely see companies like Microsoft taking a stab at it, at kind of coining a phrase and trying to own that space for MR, mixed reality. And then you get companies that kind of like don't care about trying to coin a phrase and like put their stake in the ground on that. Like Magic Leap, they're like, we call it spatial computing, and it's like, that's not going to stick, you know, for a marketing term, but that's what they're going with, and cognitively makes great sense, you know, but it's not like a marketing buzzword that they're trying to like rally around or anything. I think XR actually is a fantastic way to kind of put all of those terms under one umbrella, extended reality, in that you do view it as a spectrum, right? In that you have whole reality, which we're experiencing here today, and then you have complete virtual reality, and then everything in between. And Ben was just showing me a video for the new HTC Vive Pro, which has these two cool pass-through cameras. So you're in VR, but then it also has cameras showing you what's happening in the real space around you. And this one demo that Ben was showing me, it was like whack-a-mole, and then all of a sudden a portal opened and you step into it, and then you're in a completely VR immersed space. So with one headset, it even fluctuated back and forth kind of between this like AR, mixed reality, and virtual reality. And it's like, what is that? And they're like, that's XR. You know, like that is an immersive experience that you're having right there. So that's my take on kind of like the terminologies.
Ben, let me hit you with a little bit of a different question. And I agree, Joe, it's all about the spectrum. This is where we're going, man. It's all bleeding into each other. It's either you're completely in VR in your own world, or you're bringing digital items into your existing world, and there's everything in between.
And Microsoft messed up. They shouldn't have done what they did. Mixed reality.
By calling it MR?
That was wrong.
So it's when the modern day consumer VR, which I'm kind of putting it the DK1, Oculus DK1, so many publications were saying this is the next big thing. This is where it's all going. There's going to be billions of dollars being made in this industry. And now here we are 4.5 years later. Are we where we thought we were going to be? Is this going as quickly as we want it to? Is it going slower than we want it to? Where do you feel, Ben, that we stand right now?
Well, I think nothing's as quick as we want it, right? I mean, you grow up, you think about like the holodeck, right? And you think about Star Trek, and you know, we want that type of thing right now, but we're not. I mean, we're getting closer and closer, and we're creating better and better experiences. These things take time, and they take money, and they take people who are willing to jump into uncharted waters and to create new things that don't exist yet, and to fail at times and to not fail. And so I mean, it's hard to say really. Like, I'm happy with where things are right now. I think it's if it was going any faster, I feel like I would get left behind. And so I like the pace that it's going at, because I feel like I can be a contributor without having these other companies come in and go and do everything that I want to do. Like, there's still space to create. There's still space to evolve beyond where we are right now. And so I think we're in a comfortable pace.
I am curious, by show of hands from the audience, how many of you guys feel that things are moving as quickly as we imagined that they would? Anybody? Yeah? Okay, cool. There are obviously a lot of people wishing that we had more adopters right now. Like Ben said, we know this is going to take time, but there are some very real reasons why perhaps there's not twice as many people or 3 times as many people that have taken the plunge into VR. So I wanted to ask, guys, what do you think some of the current obstacles are for mass adoption? Joe?
So there's quite a few. So I also am approaching VR or XR design from a UX standpoint, and the user experience is a big part of it. So the fact that you're strapping something to your face already is causing like a little bit of friction. It's a new type of a new type of experience of putting something on your face, right? And that can make some people feel uncomfortable, or it's messing up your hair. Like, there's no such thing as like great hair in VR anymore. If you have makeup on your face, you know, like there's just a lot of ways to feel less than comfortable in VR that like first initial time. And so you almost got to like ease into that. And so I think that's one definite barrier. I think another significant barrier is cost. Cost is maybe one of the biggest barriers right now to entry, in that high-end VR, which is what everybody wants, is cost prohibitive, in that currently it's like $400 or $500 just to get the hardware itself, and then you need the PC, which has to be a pretty gutsy PC to run it, or a VR-enabled laptop. So you're looking at like minimum $1,200, $1,300 out the gate just to have like the whole kind of bundle to get high-end VR. Now, if you're already like a gamer, the PC's kind of already there, and then it's a little more approachable, which is why you kind of see a lot of the first adopting audience for right now very much being in the entertainment and gaming space, because they already kind of come equipped with like, I'm ready to spend money on entertainment, you know, like put some serious cash down. So you have the UX part, then you have the hardware part and the costs, and then you also have the content. And the content is, I mean, like, I bought my first iPod Touch because I was moving to China and I wanted a dictionary in my pocket. I remember that, and it was the easiest purchase I ever made. It was just like, I want a dictionary in my pocket where I can write on the keyboard, or I can write on the interface, and it will give me a character, and it'll give me a definition, and it'll make my life so much easier while I'm out there. And right now, VR is like, the content, I mean, like, it's the libraries are becoming more and more robust. They're figuring out price points to make it more attractive, you know, for consumers. But they're also still seeking kind of like, what problem is VR solving, you know, in that case? Like, for me, buying an iPod was because I needed a problem solved. I needed a dictionary that was offline, that was digital, that was robust. I didn't want to carry a book around. It was solving a real world problem for me. And right now, VR, I think in terms of problem solving, is really, it's maturing. It's very young still in that, how is it solving problems, right? And then how is that translating to consumer adoption? So,
real quick, I do have a comment on the problem solving. One of the coolest uses I've put VR to was when we went to Europe last summer. We used Google Earth VR.
Oh, awesome.
And I'd never been to Prague before, but I was able to walk those streets of Prague and actually memorize, you know, because you're having that experience. It's easy to remember those things. And when we landed and went to the hotel, it was just amazing how my mind just clicked. It's like I knew exactly where I was. It's very cool.
You knew all the best dive bars, like where those were, like before you got there. That's great.
I know that's
serious
that garden
spot
solving, down by the river and the nearest pub. Yeah,
that's cool.
Exactly.
Yeah, travel planning.
Yeah. Well, and I think going along with that, like companies like HTC and Oculus on my Facebook, they realize this, right? Like cost is a problem. People might not want to shell out $1,200 at least for something that they're going to use every once in a while. I think this is a good time probably to show Chris's latest purchase.
Yeah.
Came out yesterday, the Oculus Go. It's a $199 headset, self-contained, unlike previous versions of headsets that are similar that use like your cell phone to stick in there. This one's just a self-contained, ready to go $199. I mean, and after this, I think everyone should, you know,
Go buy one right
now. Go buy one, or you know, beg Chris to let you use his or something like that for a couple of minutes. I don't know. That's right. But it's you're in there, and granted, it only is a 3 degrees of freedom. You're only able to kind of look around. You're not able to kind of really move around a lot in the scene, right? But that's okay right now, I think. For that price point, for $199, you think about, I just get really excited. I was talking to Joe and Chris about this right before we started, and I get excited to think, I have 2 little boys. My oldest is 4, and my youngest is almost 2. And I get really excited to think about the world that they're growing up in and how VR, and specifically education in VR, is just going to be a thing. And it's not even going to be this like novelty, right? Like he's going to come home one day and be like, oh, I need to go learn about chemistry. And so then he's going to go put on the headset and go into this lab in a virtual space and start mixing chemicals to see what they do. And that's good. And it's just going to be a thing. And it's just like, we're just going to talk about it like it's just an everyday thing. I think what Oculus came out with yesterday with their Oculus Go is the first step towards that, where we're starting to be able to hit these mass markets at such a low price point. This is at the point where people can start just, you go buy one, or schools can start to buy these things. And so it's very, very exciting.
This will be the first headset my parents actually own. Right now, in the current state of VR, it's just too complex. I mean, you have to have some technical know-how to set up a Rift, to set up a Vive, to even navigate Steam. I mean, I was talking to Will Stackable from Springboard VR. He said one of the biggest challenges for consumers is just learning how to negotiate this stuff. And one thing Springboard does is they create software to make it very, very easy for people to access these experiences. So here we have for $199, this is all my parents have to do. This is what I think is so amazing about the Oculus Go. It's like, I don't even have to push an on button. I just throw that on my head. I'm in VR right now. 2 seconds. I'm in. I have an easy to... I got a menu to look at. And then I just use this to point my laser at whatever menu item I want, select it, and I'm having the experience. That's incredibly easy. This is what excites me. This is the type of stuff we need for mass adoption. I mean, you look at the price point for something like this. Prior to this, classroom, you're going to have low-end VR because it costs too much. $3,000, you can put, or $6,000, you can fill an entire classroom with this level of VR and have some amazing educational experiences. It's very exciting.
One last thought on just kind of one of the barriers to entry is how, like, as a content creator, how do you even get into the VR AR space? In that it requires like such an impressive breadth of skill sets. So like what I love about Utah is how it's such a great population of like web designers and web developers. But I mean, like web VR and web AR are still kind of these things that are growing, which I think will have explosive kind of impact on VR in general. That once you can start using A-frame or JavaScript or just like these really, you know, well-known languages to just make robust VR experiences for whatever headset, that'll open the floodgates for a lot of developers. Because if I'm a web developer and I'm looking from the outside in at VR, I'm like, I don't even know how to touch this stuff right now. I have to learn 3D modeling. I have to learn animation. I have to learn a whole new game engine, which if you've ever jumped into an Unreal or Unity like game engine your first time, you're like, what the F am I looking at right here, right? And it's just it's so different in that you're learning to think spatially, so it's requiring like totally new mental models to even approach design and the affordances involved in that experience that are like super unique from a 2D web and mobile design mind frame, you know. And I've talked to a lot of agencies that are just, they have great, you know, graphic designers and mobile web designers, but as soon as you start talking AR and VR, it is like such a foreign language that is frankly very intimidating to that design mindset, you know. And so there's been a lot of great, I think, progress from the game engine side, but then also from others to make it more approachable. Easier tools for like content creation. Google's made wonderful strides in making it more accessible from like the creative and artistic perspective with Google Blocks. With Google Blocks, you basically can become a low poly 3D modeler, you know. It's really
now all of a sudden, you do not have to be a, quote, developer to start creating stuff with tools like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and then more recently, like Amazon is even getting into this space with a tool they call Sumerian, and Sumerian is a web VR and web AR tool where even without development, you can learn to make interactive VR AR experiences over the Amazon Web Services, you know, and it's like, wow, that's really cool.
I highly recommend checking that out. You can sign up to be a beta tester for that. Yeah. Definitely worthwhile. The reason why it's going to be worthwhile is web VR is going to be a really big thing. What does that mean? What is web VR? Anyone want to take that one on? What is web VR? Where are we going with that?
Yeah, so web VR, like right now, the way we experience the internet, Your first question, Chris, what's the promise of VR, right? And I think decentralized internet access to high-quality VR experiences is where we meet that potential. If you saw Ready Player One as kind of like this big immersive world where you jump through these portals, it's not selecting a menu icon that closes an app, opens an app. This like isolated app approach to experiences is going to die with VR, I hope, right?
Mm-hmm.
But web VR means that I'm in Google Chrome browser or whatever browser you have, and this is how I see it. That I'm going to I'll be on my desktop browser, and for a lot of like quick swiping and just like information consumption, that's going to be your 2D web experience. But then all of a sudden, I'll be, and I think for e-commerce especially, that there's going to be a lot of great space for this, that it's like, here's the VR portion of this experience. Okay, and then I say I'm shopping on Amazon and I need a new blazer. Okay, so I do the 2D experience to get to that point, and then it says, great, now try on your new blazer. And then I jump into VR real quick, and then my 3D scanned avatar pops up that's just me, you know, and I swipe this jacket on in VR, and I can see how it looks. I can spin myself around and be like, that's not bad, you know, and then I can throw some new shoes on. And now it's to scale. So I'm actually like standing in VR and I can see myself at scale, 5 feet away from myself, you know, trying on new clothes, for example. And that's just like one use case where web VR becomes super accessible. I'm not having to boot up a client to like jump into a VR experience. It's just as quick and easy as going to a web domain, you know.
Then you can click on that other HTML with your new suit and all of a sudden be at a Marriott hotel on a beach somewhere, right?
In that
via
suit.
the web.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
It's amazing. I remember Janus VR is one of the first companies I became familiar with that was doing stuff in the web, and they have this great technology that you basically, to go from one internet address to another, you would simply step through a portal, and their technology allowed two-dimensional web to become 3D. Like even like if you're a Reddit user, for example, you go into a Reddit room and all of a sudden it's not just people posting their thoughts on the wall. You're suddenly in a museum and all their posts are like pictures and frames on the walls. It's like it allows you to experience the web in full immersive 3D. Mozilla just announced their social hubs. I just tried this out the other day. Super cool. Very easy. You can do it on your cell phone even if you don't have VR, and actually meet with people in there, look around in 3D and talk to people. If you do have a headset, you can simply plug it in, tap right into the internet, and you're having these social experiences with virtual reality. Really excited to see where that goes, and I think that is going to form the backbone for the metaverse.
Yeah.
It's like all of these experiences like VR chat and all these social, there'll be like bars on Main Street with the internet kind of being Main Street, and you can choose whatever bar you want to go into. And even more important is the identity involved in that. Who am I? What am I, an avatar? What's that all about? Ben, maybe you want to chat a little bit about that, because actually something you might want to know about Ben, he created one of the first apps that allowed a person to create an avatar, step into that body, and then portal themselves into a social VR experience from one platform to another to have that persistent identity.
Yeah, do you want to tell them how that ended up with that story? The very first time we showed that off. So we showed up, yeah.
Okay.
Please do.
So
it's a really
we were
funny,
at
really funny story.
VRDC, and we were showing off this technology for the first time with our partner High Fidelity. I don't know if you guys know who Philip Rosedale is. He was one of the founders for Second Life, and now he's creating a virtual world called High Fidelity. It's an amazing platform. And so they were our first test partners, and we're live at this event. And I'm building my avatar, and one of our other developers knew that there was a bug in the system, that if I waved my arms too wildly about, I would probably trigger this bug, and I did. And he was holding his head down like this. He's like, oh no, he's done it.
We didn't get this build done until maybe an hour or two before, and actually knowing that this was going to
People
work.
are like, are you sure you really want to do this?
Yeah, well, no, and actually knowing that it was going to work was maybe like 5 hours. Maybe it was like 2 in the morning when it actually worked, and we're like, oh my gosh, it works! Great, tomorrow's going to be okay then.
So I hit this bug, and the bug was where I'm supposed to throw my pants on. I cannot put my pants on. My avatar is literally standing there in its underwear, and no matter how I'm trying, I cannot get the pants on. So I'm like, okay, guys, I just hit a bug. We're going in pantsless. And the room erupts in laughter. And I step through the portal. My avatar teleports over, and they have a greeter on the other side for this event. And she's looking at me. And I'm looking at her, and I'm saying, I bet you weren't expecting this. And she's like, hey, no problem. She reaches over and grabs a virtual balloon and hands me the balloon. It was great. It was great. So,
and it showed, right? For us, it was a great moment just because, one, it worked, and two, it showed that we didn't like.
We sure didn't fake it.
It wasn't faked, right? Like, it was an actual thing. Like, we shut our app down, we loaded up their app, and we moved our, that customized avatar over, right? Yeah. So I've spent the last couple years up until very recently where I've kind of taken a step back from Morph 3D to do my own stuff, but primarily focusing on avatars in a virtual space, right? When you're in VR and you're in a high fidelity or a VR chat or anywhere, you're playing a game and you look down and you see yourself, how are you supposed to view yourself, right? And what does that look like? And how can you then, where's the technology going to come from that enables you to change your body structure, to maybe your hip height changes, or maybe you're going to put on shorts or pants or shoes or whatever, right? And it's been it's an interesting concept, right? First and foremost, to think about how do you view yourself in a virtual space when you don't have to worry about going to the store and buying nice looking clothing, and you can just go and purchase cheaply digital clothing. How are you going to view yourself? How do you see yourself, right? It's a very interesting concept, and particularly I think it's interesting when you think about places like VR chat. I don't know if anyone's been in VR chat. It's a social VR space, but you go in there, and when people are all of us, when we walk into a room, we make assumptions about people, right? I see somebody with glasses, and I'm like, oh man, you have eye problems. That sucks. I'm really sorry, right? Or like other people I know that they wear glasses because they think it makes them look smarter, and that's like a thing that people do, right? And so, but you make assumptions about people just based on their looks. But when you're in a VR space and they've been able to decide how they look, it kind of breaks down a lot of those walls and barriers, and it's harder to make assumptions. I see somebody who's dressed as Mario, and I'm like, oh cool, that guy likes Mario. I'm gonna go talk to him, and it turns out it's a girl that likes Mario, and I made that completely wrong assumption that it was a guy that liked Mario, right? And you go up and talk to him, and so I'm very excited going forward to not only have the virtual space, but then have the ability to walk into a virtual space to be who I want to be, right? And even, Joe's talking about you go into Amazon and you go try on clothes. Like, we've done stuff like that. Like, this isn't science fiction anymore. Not too long ago at Morph, it was about a year ago, we partnered with a company called Bold Metrics, and I created an experience for them using the Microsoft HoloLens, which is an augmented reality headset, in collaboration with a clothing company called G-Star Raw, where you could go and create an avatar and then choose these G-Star Raw clothing items and see your avatar, but the avatar gets changed to your specific size, so you see kind of how those clothing items fit on you. And it was a really, really cool experience to kind of see that, and it was one of the first iterations and first times I had ever seen anything like that, and for most people. And I think we're getting there. We're really, really close to that.
Quick thought. Anyone play like Skyrim? Yeah, there we go, right? So there's these games, and I fall in love with these games where like the first thing they have you do is customize your character. I spend an absurd amount of time like perfecting that jawline, or whatever, and it is ridiculous. Like, it makes no sense. And unless the game has a mirror, oftentimes you don't even see what your avatar looks like.
Fortnite. Fortnite? Yeah. You guys buy clothing for your character? Fortnite?
I bought the battle pass just so I could get new skins. Like, so there's just something about us often that like we, especially kind of from that video gaming perspective, that we want to look cool, or we like gaming. It just as like a general philosophy, it allows us to become something more than we think we are. It allows us to act on our courage or even destructive impulses. Sometimes I'm thinking of Grand Theft Auto there, but like what's really powerful about the avatar is that it is a projection of yourself. It's a projection of your perception of your identity, you know, and that's a really powerful concept. And like, what is that? Are you an anime princess? You know, do you have a huge sword that you're carrying around, or are you like a tiny Russian tank? Are you a Ugandan Knuckles? Like, what's your thing? You know, and VR is so cool in that it's kind of this really weird space right now for social VR. Just contrasting two examples, VR chat and alt space. So alt space was like one of the first movers for social VR, I want to say. And they kind of have a very generic approach towards avatar creation, which frankly, it's like, I think they're missing out on a huge opportunity for that. But they did it because they wanted to control that environment a lot. So they have like male, female, and then like 4 colors you can choose from, and then like 3 shirt designs and 2 pant designs, like no joke. Like, and then there's 2 robots, and like that's it, right? Super basic, and so like the ability to really express like your personality via your avatar is ultra limited. Now VR chat, on the other hand, it's actually really a complicated process to take a 3D model that you think accurately expresses your personality and to like integrate that into the VR chat experience. Super clunky. It's like the worst UX. But you jump in there and you see like a million different types of avatars, and everybody's a little different. Some guy's huge, some dude's tiny, you know, and like it's kind of mind blowing. And it reminds me of the first, you know, early days of the internet, when there's like all these weird like chat rooms where people would just, you could say whatever you wanted, and it was just like loads of trolls everywhere and tons of sexual harassment and like just this like weird Wild West. And like that experience is happening again in VR, but it's becoming more understood, safer environment where there's more like you can call them regulations or just like privacy settings, so that like I can be invisible to everyone else.
I can make you irrelevant.
I can make you irrelevant. You know, like proximity. Like it's really weird in VR if someone like gets in your personal space. It's just kind of like, dude, back off. You know, and there's not much sometimes that you can do about it. But then developers now are getting savvier to this and making it so that like I can have a 3-foot bubble around me that once they cross that, they go invisible. You know, and then they're not in your grill anymore. And so it's becoming a more comfortable kind of, what are social norms and how are these evolving in this new social space? All those things are evolving.
And no doubt about it, social VR is a driver for adoption. Jessica Outlaw, who's a behavioral scientist, just did a big survey of people that are using VR, and unanimously, people want social experiences in VR. So this is going to be something to pay attention to, whether it's avatars or what spaces you're sharing these experiences in. All of these are extremely relevant for adoption. One of the fastest growing sectors in VR is the out-of-home virtual reality experiences. VR arcades are sprouting up all over the world. I think Springboard VR, they're logging, with all of their partners, they're logging about 3 million minutes a month of getting data on users. I mean, it's really taking off. Joe, you were part of the Void. Void was a pioneer in this space. They were one of the first ones out of the gate to create out-of-home experiences. Do you have any thoughts on this space? Why is it as successful as it is? Where do you see that space going?
That's a great question. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Void, it's a VR, gosh, I don't even know how to describe it, right? So it's a VR space that uses when you go to a haunted house, you have like a footprint. You have a haunted house that you're in with practical effects and things jumping out and scaring you. The Void is similar to that in that it occupies a physical space of like 30 by 30 feet, and there's physical walls, that if you look at it with your eyes, they're just kind of this bland gray. But then as soon as you put your VR headset on, all of a sudden it's a Manhattan hotel that's haunted by ghosts. And
So
you're
it's
a
like you're
Ghostbuster.
overlaying a virtual world over the top of a physical
Correct.
world.
Yeah. So that's their approach to VR and location-based entertainment. And the way they do it is joint venture partnerships. So they go to, rather than the Void opening up their own location and then all like the brick and mortar physical rent space and then like utilities, and it's a high cost endeavor to approach it that way. Instead, they partner up with like this, like with Disney, they have a space available that the Void then just brings their hardware in to occupy. So they're mitigating a lot of that risk by the joint venture model, right? And what's great about that, in what we saw, so like if you were to look at Steam VR and Oculus, demographic-wise and psychographic-wise, you're going to get this like kind of hardcore early adopter type demo with a heavy gaming and entertainment emphasis. But location-based entertainment, and why the Void, I think, in some of the ways why they're successful, is it's able to pull in like a much broader cut at a demographic. Who's going to Disneyland? Everybody's going to Disneyland. It's not just like this one like targeted demographic. So they're getting a lot of great data points across like a really diverse marketplace, a really diverse demographic, so that they can kind of keep tweaking that content and the user experience to cater more towards this generalized or a broader demo. And that's a huge thing. So then VR arcades, which are a little different from the Void. So the Void is like a lot of money, needs a lot of investment, it needs a big team to occupy, and they got into that space early and are now kind of cashing in on these great opportunities with Disney and to be able to use really popular IP like Star Wars. But then you kind of have these smaller mom and pop, I guess like individually owned and operated VR arcades. And there's a few in Utah. So there's like VR Experience in Provo, VR Junkies in Provo, Virtualities here at the Gateway Mall. And typically what this is just like some young upstart that wants to be involved in VR. They throw in a lot of personal cash, probably get some business loans, no venture capital for the most part, and they operate a VR arcade. You know, and a lot of it's kind of like trial and error to see what works best. They have to do their own marketing, which is a huge pain for these VR arcade owners. And then you get partners like Springboard that come in with a huge value add for these VR arcade owners saying, hey, we're going to make your job like 1,000,000 times easier. Here's a super simplified interface. It's a subscription model. All you need is the base stations.
We take care of all the licensing arrangements, all of that.
And so all you need is a physical location with working headsets, you know, and then we'll help kind of like smooth over the rest. So the concern with just recently there was a VR arcade conference in Bay Area, and a lot of talk about like, yes, it's a big growing space, and it's growing for a couple of reasons. It's growing because there's still a ton of people that don't have VR headsets, and so it's a really like low barrier entry when I'm out looking to spend money anyway, and for $15, me and my girlfriend can go have a great experience at this VR arcade and shoot zombies, you know. And it's like it's a very casual approach towards VR adoption, which is cool. Question, yeah.
So what was the franchise parent company you just said? VR
Springboard? Yeah, so that's like it's a software platform that gets you. It helps with licensing, and it's a platform where I can say, I want to play this game. I press the button, and then it launches the game really simply from there.
Makes it so you don't have to babysit the user so much. It's a very slick software for user interface and management.
The danger right now with kind of these like smaller scale VR arcades, however, is just the classic brick and mortar challenge, is that it's really hard to grow unless you have multiple locations. And if you do have multiple locations, then you start bumping up against other franchises that also have locations. So now you're kind of like in these turf war battles, you know. But then a lot of it is just kind of bandwidth, and that marketing and location determine a lot of your foot traffic and your throughput. And if you're in a sucky location, you're stuck with it, and you have to maximize that however you can. So there's a lot of arcades, like I think like 90% of Planet Earth's VR arcades are in China, actually, and a ton of them just shut down because of similar challenges to growth to that model. In the U.S., however, I think it's growing beyond. There's like over 150 VR arcades right now, one in almost every major U.S. city, and then additional ones growing beyond that. And there's a few larger chains, like VR Studios is kind of a chain. And then there's a few others where they have like multiple centers that they're opening up, kind of like the classic arcade model, right? And one fun endeavor that I'm working on right now, so I'm a shareholder and working with Virtualities, a VR arcade based out of the Gateway Mall, is that rather than competing with other VR arcades and just going with this strict brick and mortar model, is we're creating a VR esports league as league operators, so that we create this platform and kind of an ecosystem where small-scale VR arcades will directly benefit from our efforts to market for them and connect them to game developers and to a tournament and league-based structure. And then game developers also can kind of benefit from that because now they have more of a fan base and kind of a brand, a league brand to kind of rally around. And it's a fun space for us to operate in because esports is just a really hot place right now for gamers, for investment, for really cool technologies. But it hasn't transitioned to VR yet for some of these similar problems with like content and not quite mass adoption, right? So where esports was in 2007, 2008 is where VR esports is right now. So Virtualities is trying to position itself to pioneer that and be in a great position to negotiate broadcasting and like Twitch rights and ESPN rights for like proprietary tournaments and league stuff like that. So anyway.
An interesting stat I heard was that VR arcades, I believe at least in the U.S., are running at 70% capacity or higher on average. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's true. And for Virtualities, a huge part of its location is that a lot of their throughput is actually from like corporate parties, birthday parties. It's not just people aren't visiting malls anymore, so it's not just walk-ins. It's mostly 70% of that capacity is like scheduled, events that they're holding.
Cool. One of the other hot markets that we're seeing is training. You mentioned corporate training, but I'm talking, training on how. I even had Chili's approach me saying, we would love to have a virtual experience where fires can break out in the kitchen and people know how to deal with that, or a barroom brawl breaks out. We can't very easily replicate that in real life, so virtual reality is like one of the best ways to do this. Which also brings me to, and I know, Ben, you're going to love this topic, reality capture. I don't know have you guys ever experienced a photogrammetry scene in virtual reality where they're taking actual pictures from multiple angles, bringing that through software into virtual reality where you can walk around. Like if we did that in this room, you'd be able to go back into VR and literally walk around this room as it exists. It's reality capture. A lot of stuff going on in that space with light field technology. Light field technology is really cool in that it's almost like capturing a volume of space. And once you bring that volume of space in, like let's say I have this light field capture camera, I can get this 1 meter cube captured exactly how I would see it from any angle within that cube. I bring it into VR, I can now enter that space and all the light refracts appropriately. I can even turn my head sideways, which you can't do with typical 3D stereoscopy. You'll break the illusion if you turn your head, but with light field, it's like capturing a slice of reality. Imagine the trainings and things you can do, the vacation spots, the capturing archaeological ruins that are at risk for destruction. You can permanently bring that in to a VR experience and walk through that at any time. Ben, you're doing some stuff with reality capture even in the AR field. What's your thoughts on reality capture? Where are we going with this? What promises does that hold here in the near future?
Oh, man. So for me, I mean, in my mind, it's kind of the holy grail. So I'm the weird dad that after his kids go to sleep, I sneak into their room and I take a video of them and the entire room while they're sleeping. And it is kind of creepy, but at the same time, it's cool because then later I go and run that video through photogrammetry software, and now I have that moment captured in time. And then and this is just for me, like personally, I go back and I walk through these moments, right? From like I have 3D models of my youngest son who's almost 2. I have a model of him when he was like 5 months old. And it's the most magical experience to go back into VR and almost like hold this child that was just this like, tiny little baby, right? And so I think we're getting better and better at figuring out how to capture these things. If you've ever done one of there's a company out of Southern California called 8i, and they do volumetric video capture. So they'll go and they'll have somebody come in on this stage and do a presentation, and they'll capture that entire thing. And then you can go back and you can go in VR, and they're literally like right there, and they can and they can talk to you. And it's a very like special, magical moment, I think, as well. Like sometimes my wife and I will go in VR, and we've never been to France, we'll go visit caves in southern France, because people have gone and done photogrammetry of these caves in southern France. I've never been there. It's expensive for me to fly my family out there, but it's a lot easier to go in VR and just kind of experience this. Also, just with trainings, I mean, you think about Walmart, right? Walmart went all in on VR trainings, and they purchased thousands of headsets, and they send their associates to do trainings in VR. And they're not the only company. There's a lot of companies that this is kind of what they're looking at, and it's cheaper, it's easier, and it makes more sense to get people on board with figuring out how to do things in a digital environment. I actually worked with the University of Utah not too long ago on some of their initial training software and simulators and kind of demos for the dentistry department, right? And so we built stuff that you could go in and basically help somebody fill a cavity, right? You could go drill it out, and you can go put the little light on there after you put in I don't know, I'm not a dentist.
And I remember the dentist that was doing that demo, he said, I am reacting as though this is a real patient. I'm actually stressed out that I might do something wrong here with this real patient.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's an accelerator in California called Boost VC, and they are one of the top like VR, AI, and blockchain accelerators in the world. And their most recent cohort, they just had they had demo day where they presented their companies to a lot of like over 100 investors from the Bay Area. And the first one to kind of get their first micro investment, it was I think $300,000 for sexual harassment training, and it's really great. And I think it fills in a lot of gaps. Like VR simulation just fills in so many gaps in HR and training that just aren't practical for a lot of reasons, in real life. So, I mean, imagine being mansplained, in VR, and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, now you know what it feels like, right? And it's a real thing, and it's a real challenge, and like there's money behind it. And then there was another VR training company called Apex Officer, and so these guys created training simulators for de-escalation techniques for officers in military. And so like the U.S. Air Force is one of their clients, and then they've pitched to like all these like major like state governments and local governments with police forces to just basically like we don't want more shootings. How do we kind of work towards that through VR as a training module?
All right, we've got about 20 minutes left on the panel. I'd like to open this up for potential questions from the audience. Does anybody have any questions about the VR market or what's going on? Go ahead, right here in the front.
Oh, okay. So there's this term called memory palace, where I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but
Sherlock.
Yes.
you're able to memorize a certain amount of data. You can memorize cards, you can memorize names, you can memorize a lot of different things. So with augmented reality or virtual reality, how do you guys see the learning process changing, specifically with tactics like memory palace, where you could pull up 100 items and go through them in less than 20 seconds?
Yeah. So the memory palace that you're talking about, this is a technique that's been used for hundreds, if not thousands of years, where you use 3D imagery in your brain to place topics, to place whatever you want to remember. You place it in your mind in a certain space in your mind, right? So they've replicated this with virtual reality, so you can actually go into VR and place these memories around in a 3D spatial space, mimicking that technique that's been used for thousands of years, right? Super cool. What's cool about education VR is it's experiential learning, because your brain is processing things as though this is why we do field trips with kids in school, right? Is because your memory retention is so much greater when you actually experience something. And the brain, VR is powerful enough that it does trick the brain into thinking this is an experience, so that retention has been shown to be much, much higher. In fact, I remember this interview they did with some kids that went on a virtual field trip. It was crazy because when they described those experiences, they described it as a real event, not something that they did in VR. It's like that's just the way it's stuck in their brain.
Hey, Chris, can you make sure to repeat the question for everybody?
Oh, yeah. And the question on that was, how is VR going to help in the education, help with our memory? That was the question, right? Did you have a comment on that, Joe?
Yeah, just learning by doing. So mastery-based learning and practical learning, I think, will definitely have its heyday in VR. So I think memorization will become less important as a technique for actual productivity and for learning. While there are really cool techniques for memorization techniques like a memory palace, I will learn to cook by cooking. I will learn to fish by fishing. I will learn Chinese by actually writing in calligraphy in Chinese and then standing across from a Chinese person while trying to order food rather than from a book telling me what I'm supposed to say. So it's experiential learning.
I think it really is going to revolutionize the educational field for sure.
Yeah.
Do you guys see 10, 20 years in the future, us just becoming superhumans where we're just so smart? We know 10 different languages. We explore the world multiple different times. Do you see that happening? Because we'll be able to do that.
Is VR going to turn us into superhumans in 20 years by being able to experience a ton of things that we've never been able to experience practically in our life?
That's a really cool question. So there's a few people kind of, I think, drawing some lines in the sand right now. So there's a team down in Pleasant Grove called Evermore, and they're making a live-action fantasy park. And what they're kind of basically going for is look, in a world where you can do anything with digital experiences, as humans, we still crave reality. We crave these real interactions. We crave real conversations, friendships, relationships. And so there will all, yes, I think, just comparing our generation with my grandparents or great-grandparents and the way that our minds have just opened towards accepting different things in the world, or how we're way more productive, well, arguably productive with our time, right? But that in terms of creativity, I think I have a lot of really high hopes that these new technologies essentially will create superhumans, but also will basically. So I have 3 kids. Right? And one philosophy that I hold towards virtual reality is that it doesn't become an escapist mechanism. And that's a fear that I have, and that I'm building against. As a designer, it's the power of this technology is not to escape reality; it's to enhance reality. It's to inspire reality. So, will all of this technology create superhumans? It all, of course, will come down to how are we going to use it? Are we using it responsibly? Is it going to be, or is it a way that we're going to dig a big hole, in our social life, or in conservation, in human rights and civil rights? Are these things going to break chains, or is it going to give us more baggage? And these are choices that developers have to make and consumers make as well in their adoption of those technologies. That's a big question, man. So but I'm a believer and I'm hopeful for the future.
You had a question back here?
That's more a comment. I think Ben was talking about use cases, and this industry is in its infancy. And sometimes we see new use cases that just open up our minds to new possibilities. 2 weeks ago, I was talking to visually impaired friends from Denver, Colorado. She's helping a company to test the AR mixed reality software there that was giving her, a better notion of reality than her dog. She was getting more input from the software than from her own dog. And I think, suddenly you get a new use case, and bang, you have a completely new dimension going on. So it's just to reaffirm your point about, this thing is going
you know, to be much bigger than we
Right.
anticipate.
Yeah, well, and to kind of add to that, I think, you know, the point that I always try to drive home with people is that we're at this point where I think everyone needs to stop thinking about these emerging technologies from the side of a consumer or a user, but more of a kind of creator, right? Like, we're at this kind of inflection point where these things will become a reality. Like, that's inevitable. It's going to happen. VR and AR are going to be part of our daily lives. But I think we're at the point right now, and what I get most excited about is we have the ability right now to make the decision to, okay, I'm going to try to create a better world using these things, and I can do that because it's early enough, right? And I can be a major player in this. And so then it's this ability now to create these amazing use cases, right? I mean, and I have yet to use it, but Vivid Vision makes a VR experience, and I tell the story all the time, for people with amblyopia, which is lazy eye. I happen to have amblyopia. I wore an eye patch when I was a child for a couple of years trying to make my right. I do most of my seeing on my left eye with the help of a contact lens, and my right eye just kind of hangs out. And I actually have yet to use this because I'm insurance company things that I'm figuring out with them. But I'm very excited because that's another wonderful use case that for the first time, I mean, I was told as a kid, amblyopia, I'm sorry, like, we can't, I mean, I was told by eye doctors that amblyopia meant we don't know what's wrong. Like, that was the definition that they said. And I was told, yeah, like, basically after you get past age 10, there's really nothing we can do. And then now I hear about companies like Vivid Vision, and they're using VR, and they help people to cure their amblyopia using VR. And it's a thing, and it's been researched, and it's working. And so, I mean, just a million use cases. And every single day, I'm on the phone with Chris probably once a day, every other day, and we're talking about just amazing use cases.
Cool. We're going to try to squeeze in a few more questions here. We got about 15 minutes left.
So my question kind of goes back to what you just said. You said VR, AR, which is it's a common thing. It's going to be part of our lives. We talk about that. You're talking about that. But my question is to you we've heard this kind of story before. We've heard it with 3D. I'm with Dana here. We're on a group that deals a lot with drones and the use of drones. And a few years ago, that was nothing. That was all that everybody could talk about. And now it's plateaued. So can you guys tell me why this is not going to plateau and why this won't go the way of 3D?
Yeah, great question. So I have one of my good friends. He is like not bullish at all on VR, and he's like, yeah, it's passing trend, just like 3D TVs. When looking at VR from like a display technology perspective, that's kind of what it can feel like. It's just a different way to view something, right? But when you look beyond just what that display technology is into, and this is where the content kind of ties in, that it's a new mode of communication technology. It's a different way for us to connect with the world, with ourselves, and with others. And it's because of that added layer of like extra humanity, I guess I want to call it. Just what the internet did for humanity, in that there was no turning back from that. That VR is that momentous, you know, it is that impactful on the way that we will communicate and connect with the rest of the world. That's why it's not going away.
Mm-hmm.
Just quickly to add to that, I think kind of what Joe was talking about earlier, it solves problems. In my mind, 3D TVs didn't really solve many problems. 3D printing solves some problems, but maybe it's not for everyone. There's been hype on different technology, but I think VR and AR have the potential to solve the most problems. And in my mind, that's kind of why it's not going to go away, because there are so many ways of problems that we have that we can use this technology to solve it.
Hey guys, first of all, thank you. I honestly know nothing about VR or AR content creation, so this was really a great thing to hear. And you might have just answered my question so I do have an opportunity, luckily, to make some low-budget genre movies occasionally. And people always ask from Hollywood, can you start using VR or AR on live-action features or, you know, streaming services? So I was curious about what you guys thought, if there's barriers to entry to that, or if that's something in the future that might happen.
Yeah, so that was a big part of what I got to do at Cosmic Pictures as their executive producer for VR and AR. We used it more in terms of like product advertisement rather than actual episodic or feature work. There's a lot of awesome crews that I could recommend to you. Felix and Paul is kind of like the gold standard of what 360 VR means right now. These guys do live action work, really phenomenal. What I can tell you is that it is expensive, but working in film, it's all expensive. It requires just a different skill set, so you'll likely have to outsource outside your typical, crew. You'll need 3D modelers, or you'll need someone to run it through an engine. So you'll need Unity or Unreal developers. But it's totally possible, and it's you're going to feel challenged as a producer or a director, and that it's forcing you to think in completely new ways to communicate that story. Yeah. That's going to live in a couple places. So it's going to live on the Oculus store. Think of that like an app store. Steam is a really popular place where that gets published. And then WebVR is kind of like the new up-and-coming kind of place. So it's just on a website. Yeah.
And take time to learn the differences of the way things can be filmed. There's 360, where it's all around you. There's 3D 360, which requires multiple lenses to give an actual 3D effect to that 360 surround. And then there's volumetric capturing. Lots of different ways you can go about.
You can always hire somebody else.
Anybody else have a question? Yes, absolutely. So one of my good oh, you got one more? Okay, last question here.
Love it. Love it.
Okay, so my question comes back into the human side of the equation. So right now, specifically, when you meet somebody new, it's what they look like, what they say, what the background, what university they went to, what neighborhood they grew up in, the way they talk. If you say mountain, like, oh, we're from Utah, yeah, we can be friends. How do you see those relationships changing in the virtual world where you're building friendships with people, across the world?
I kind of take a lot of cues from social gaming in general. So when you look at like Destiny 2 or Overwatch or a lot of these like multiplayer competitive games, like I am not a very, I don't turn on my audio. I don't turn on my microphone. I am super comfortable with solo queuing and just going in myself. And I'm like, I'm just going to be that guy in the back, and you all can talk and strategize. But for a lot of people, they're super comfortable going in and just like meeting new people. And then that context of whatever experience you're having right then kind of becomes the focal point, or it becomes kind of like that's where you're hanging out with these new interesting people. So how will the relationships evolve? I think it's strongly connected to the content that you're experiencing at that time. And strangely enough, Facebook also announced yesterday a new dating service, so how are people even supposed to meet each other anymore? Well, I mean, like, it's becoming more and more common, and I think socially acceptable to be like, yeah, I met my wife on Tinder, and it's not like a weird thing anymore. It's like, yeah, cool, that's great. Well, that's going to happen in VR as well, and I think there was even like a VR dating live reality show, so they're in VR like hanging out doing stuff together, yeah. Yeah. The actual you? Yeah. Yeah. Think of it like when I yeah. Yeah. So like I guess like when I was and this is maybe a tangent, right? Yeah.
But at the same time, not spend this whole entire time doing it live.
So I've worked remote for the last 2 years with a lot of different companies, and it's actually on my Discord server or on Google Hangouts, I see this guy in his little box, and I've been hanging out with him with like 3 meetings a week for like a year and a half, right? And I feel like it's all around this context of whatever we're talking about at that moment. So there is that like limit to where that relationship really progresses to. But then you run into that person in real life and you're like, and it's like this awesome moment, and it's happened to me twice, where I've never met them in person, but after like a year of working remote, I see them in real life, and I'm like, you're human, you know, like you're way shorter than I thought you were, you know, or way taller. And like there is definitely something super special and very human. I think that's just core to our nature that says like, yeah, we need that. But for a lot of people, it actually, that distance of being in VR allows them to feel more of them, be more, I guess, like more natural, more of themselves. They don't feel judged. Like there's a lot of people ultra like passive and introverted that don't feel comfortable in physical social situations, but are way more outgoing, you know, in digital situations.
All right, guys, we are going to wrap this up, but I want to make a final introduction. Will, come on out. So we got a really cool experience lined up for you guys. This is called world scale VR. You know, most of the time when we're using VR, we're confined either if it's only 3 degrees of freedom, we're just stuck spinning around. If we've got a Vive or something, we can go to room scale, about 15 foot by 15 foot. But what Will's got here is the Omen backpack and the Samsung Odyssey hooked up together that provides world scale. You could literally walk through an entire parking garage. And I will tell you, there is something magical about being able to take not 3, 4, 5 steps in VR, but once you get beyond 6 and 7 steps, something clicks in the brain that's really unique. It really puts you in that place. So I encourage you guys to give it a spin. It's absolutely amazing. Will's actually just an incredible guy. He actually created world scale using a Samsung Gear. This is years ago. A Samsung Gear with a Project Tango mounted on a headset, and we were walking around parking garages that summer and doing all kinds of skateboarding in VR and all kinds of crazy stuff. So give this a shot. It's a lot of fun, guys. I want to thank Joe and Ben for being panelists here. So much experience to be had. I mean, we didn't even talk about AI in VR or machine learning in VR. So many rabbit holes we can go down. But thank you guys for being here, and let's give the panelists a round of applause.
And thank you, Chris, and thank you, panel, again. So can I ask you guys one question then as my wrap-up? So thinking about our mission as UDEN then to bring our communities together, we had a whole year's focus on VR and AR last year because we figured it was a means to help bring these communities together. Kind of the blurring of the lines between film and game and education and so on in terms of historical references. So what do you think? How useful do you think VR is going to turn out to be now that maybe it's not turned out quite the way that it was originally thought to be turning out? Thoughts?
In some ways, I feel like we're just kind of getting started. As someone mentioned here that we are in its infancy. I think we've got a lot more tools right now than we did even a year ago when we made that decision. I know I've met a lot of people through UDEN that we can collaborate with. There's a lot of opportunity for collaboration. We got a lot of folks like Joe and Ben here who have learned an awful lot over the last year just doing what they do. We've got a lot more knowledge than we did a year ago. So I think we should take advantage of that, collaborate. And if you guys got projects that you want to do, if you have ideas, if you're an artist that wants to get involved in this space, just give us a shout. Under the UDEN umbrella, this is the opportunity to do that. I know of multiple studios around town that once they get a gig, they're going to be looking for artists, you know. Business comes and goes, and when it's hot, we need people involved in that. And I see a lot of spaces where things are getting hot. The medical field, the educational field, the training field, all of that. We're going to need developers.
I think the invitation from me is that if you're like, just think on whatever your background is, whatever your career or profession is, or your craft, there is a way to just crush it in VR and AR with that thing. Whether it's life insurance, you know, or whether it's composing music, or whether it's UX design, or whether it's live action film. It is the early days of all of these, so you'll get frustrated early on because there's not like a set of guidelines that you can follow, or like common things that everyone else knows in film, because film's been around for so stinking long that like just a lot of these conveniences and like language to communicate has already kind of been fleshed out. Be a pioneer, you know, and come everybody. Like there is a place for you, and you want job security if you're young and a student, man, get into VR, AR, AI, like stake your claim and start making that happen.
Keep an eye on that web VR space. I'm not kidding. It's going to go crazy.
Yeah, and then just the last thing, like I've been legitimately surprised in the last year how many AR, VR startups have started here in the state of Utah. It's growing a lot, and so whether you have an idea of something you want to do, go do it, or go and jump in with someone else who's already doing something. Like there's a lot happening in Utah in the space, and I think you could use UDEN as a kind of gateway to get involved with all of that.
UDEN, your gateway. Thank you. So again, good job, panel. And I would encourage you. We had this sentiment quite a few times yesterday during the conversations we were having during the first day of Hive Ignite, and that is, so look, UDEN's job really is to help bring people together and help provide a platform for those collaborations. We got a meeting tonight. It's our next membership meeting. There'll be about 100 odd people here, and hot food. So you know, it's a good opportunity to then make those connections. Above all that, the key thing that we kept coming up with yesterday was hire local, right? Yeah. So if you want to find people to work with on whatever project you're working on, or you're looking to find someone to work for as a contractor or as an employee, look to locals first. The number of people that tell me, I can't find anybody to work with here, right? They're here. We've just not been very good at finding one another. That's been part of our problem with our ecosystem. So again, you've heard here today, there's a lot of leading edge expertise here, not least standing in the corner there, right? These are people willing to offer to help, and if they can't help you, they can point you in the right direction. So please join me once again thanking our panel for a great session on AR and VR. Thanks, guys.